Well, thank you for the chance to say a few words about the crisis and what the prospects are for progressive parties, particularly in Australia. I want to start by saying that I'm one of the people who think that that an early recovery, that all this kind of worldwide spotting of green shoots is vastly overdone. I think that we've been through a traumatic experience last autumn with the near collapse of the Western banking system. There's been an awful lot of wealth destroyed around the world, and that when you get wealth destruction on that scale, and when you have a traumatic event on this scale, economies don't just resume as if nothing happened. Consumers are frightened, they're rebuilding their balance sheets, they're not taking out big mortgages, they're paying off their debts. Companies are frightened, they're doing exactly the same. And private sector demand everywhere is very constrained. People are really, they've been shaken to the quick of themselves by the potential collapse of great names in banking, great names in insurance. They don't know who to trust. Companies themselves are borrowed a lot of money, expecting the good times to go on forever, and they haven't. There's retrenchment everywhere, and it's things in China. We rely on that reflation, but the banking system through which the Chinese are reflating is on the edge. Germany in the European Union could be a European Japan, bringing down the whole of the European economy. The Americans are talking about a second fiscal stimulus package. And wherever you look, the story is edgy, very fragile, full of risk. And that's where we are. Working class people are concerned. They know that their jobs are potentially at risk, and they're not certain that the order through which they've lived the last 10 or 15 years made much sense. And the truth is it didn't. Because when you get down to the brass tacks with this credit crunch, and there's lots of technical reasons why there was a credit crunch. I mean, there was collateralized debt obligations, bankers taking too much risk, which they didn't understand. I mean, everyone knows the stories that you can read about why the 10 good years and why the crunch. But what I think is that underneath all this technical stuff lay a story of doing capitalism profoundly unfairly. When those bankers sold those securities to investors, knowing that they weren't worth the dollars that they were written on, the underlying assets did not support the price, they knew what they were doing. That was an unfair bargain. Remuneration committees of banks that actually set amazing remuneration packages, saying you can walk away at the end of a year with 30, 40, 50 million American dollars as a kind of middle-ranking, trader. Same thing going on in private equity or in hedge funds. We're setting a kind of standard for performance that was beyond discretionary effort. It was not due desert for discretionary effort. It was unfair. The relationship the banks had with the rest of us, saying, knowing that they were betting our money in things they didn't really understand to make themselves dynastic fortunes, with at the limit knowing that taxpayers would pick up the bill. That was unfair. This was about unfairness, and by neglecting fairness, neglecting ethics, we've ended up with this stunning catastrophic event, which, unless governments worldwide had acted as they have, would have created, and there should be any doubt, a depression as severe as that between 1929 and 1933. And by the way, I think that things are going to be, we may not have the Great Depression, we may have a Great Recession, but we could have some years of very, very slow growth, just a bit better than stagnation. And I think the temptation to go for protection and all that follows in the wake of protection, kind of asserting the importance of blood, nationhood, ethnicity, tribe, kinship, which goes along with a retreat from openness and towards closure, is the kind of background in which you can have regional wars or worse. So this is an unpropitious time. But in some respects, it's a propitious time for the left and for progressive parties. Already it's clear that Ronald Reagan's famous joke, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help you," and how Republicans laughed at that. The idea of the government being here to help you was so risible we could all roar with laughter at that. Not now. Not after $9 trillion worth of government support round the world to support a banking system that, had that not happened, would have taken the whole of the private sector economy into a massive slump. It was obvious that without government action, where would we be? Government has been re-legitimised big time, and in parallel with that, the proposition that market fundamentalism and trust in markets completely, and they will always deliver the bacon, that's been shaken. And we're moving into a world in which it becomes more obvious that actually wealth is co-produced by the public and the private sector. There's an interdependence between the two, and we shouldn't over-prioritise the private sector and say only good things can happen in it and only bad things can happen in government. And that's a big moment, I think, for Social Democrats and for progressives, because unless we can talk the language of public purpose, unless we can say that governments can do things that bring about good results, we're not even at the races. Next thing is this argument about fairness. It was unfairness, in my view, that actually was one of the reasons, chief reason, why we have this credit crunch. And it will be fairness and a commitment to fairness that will put economies back on their feet. The knowledge economy is the big story of our times. Awful lot of change being driven by technologies cascading on us and consumers wanting to adopt those technologies because they want to live a life well, they want to live a life that they have reason to choose, and experimenting with new things that make their lives better is what they want to do. That's going to create an awful lot of churn and change in the labour market. Firms are going to rise very suddenly, they're going to fall very suddenly. It's a cascade, it's not just one thing and another thing and another thing sequentially. It's all coming simultaneously in our times. To capitalise on that, you have got to run societies fairly and companies fairly. Otherwise, you lose that. If you don't run societies fairly, there'll be resistance to the change. And if you don't run companies fairly, you won't be able to capitalise upon the opportunities, because you won't capture the hearts and minds of workforces that drive companies forward in a knowledge economy world. Governments have got to think about how to do social security better, how to help working class people manage risk better, how to equip them with skills better, how they can build up assets for retirement better, how they can guard against the risks that attend you in working class life. That's the historic role of social democratic parties, to help ordinary working class people manage the risk of living in a fast-changing and necessarily unfair capitalist society, to enable them to do better. In the decades ahead, fairness is going to become more important, and the case for government is going to become more important. Put those two things together as a consequence of this credit crunch, and you start to have a very, very powerful case for social democracy. What we have to be smart at is what we're actually going to do. What are we going to do on fiscal policy? What institutions are we going to build? What's the character of the welfare system going to look like? How are we going to reconstruct our financial system? What are universities going to look like? How do health systems look like in this world? And big, big questions. Well, I've said my say. I want to spend time in Australia over the next kind of 9-12 months. You are a part of the world where really interesting things are happening. Kevin Rudd's Labour Party, Obama's Democrats, are the you are the carriers really of progressive ideas at this moment in time. It's a responsibility not just for your own people, but for those of us around the world who are watching. We hope in Britain that the Labour Party doesn't get annihilated in the general election in 2010, but it's not looking good. We need ideas, and we need things to work in Australia as an example of what can be done by determined, smart social democrats who take arguments out to the Australian public and win them. Thank you very much.